if one was to make a general rule, it's that people who are opposed to or feel very nervous about impending military action often make legal arguments. And that's sometimes referred to as lawfare. The fact is, the Trump administration has been conducting these lethal operations against the boats for the past 2 months, and so far has not faced a legal challenge. But I think it is the case that if they were to be challenged in court, these things, the legal aspects of this would obviously become much more important, particularly so if it were to be demonstrable that they had killed innocent people in one of these strikes on a boat.
Mark Urban is here, as he is every Monday, to talk us through the big foreign policy, diplomatic and defence stories. Hello, Mark.
Good morning. That's a switch from Mr. Bean to world disorder, but
you know
let's
me.
give it a go.
Switch on a sixpence, which is more important? Let's talk about Venezuela, Mark. The Trump administration has escalated its pressure on Venezuela, which it is targeting over claims of narco-terrorism from cartels smuggling drugs into the US. The US's most advanced and largest aircraft carrier is now in the Caribbean Sea as part of the Pentagon's Operation Southern Spear. And the US military has amassed more than a dozen warships and 15,000 troops in the region. Mark, the obvious speculation here is that actually this is preparation for direct military action against Venezuela. How likely is that?
I think it is quite likely, notwithstanding that a couple of weeks ago, the Trump administration assured members of Congress who were nervous about the legal basis for this that they were not planning to take military action. But I think we've seen a few things in the last couple of days. Obviously, as you mentioned, you've got the surging of military forces, including that USS Ford carrier strike group with its aircraft and accompanying destroyers that have cruise missiles. I think also what's been quite interesting is the announcement from the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, that they are designating what they say is a drug cartel. There's a bit of a debate about whether it really exists as a criminal organization, but never mind, as a foreign terrorist organization. Now, this could well be part of the necessary preparation in a legal sense for the use of force, because there have been some people in Congress who've been saying you can't just go to war without a congressional authorization for that, which is called an AUMF, an authorization for the use of military force. So that's where we are. And I think it's probably the case that although we have already seen hostilities in the sense of blowing up about 24 of these alleged narco boats, smugglers' boats, over the last 2 months, the way forces have been built up can't be sustained indefinitely. So I think to one extent or another, this is coming to a head fairly soon.
How reasonable is it of the Trump administration to hold the Venezuelan government directly responsible for these kind of drugs at this volume being smuggled into the United States?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, a big part of the argument is that drugs coming in those quantities are killing thousands of Americans and therefore constitute a threat to national security. Now, you can argue that's a long-standing American position since the beginning of the 90s, when the so-called war on drugs was happening. And, at that time, the Americans did give all sorts of assistance to the governments in Colombia and Peru, where most of the cocaine, which was the issue at the time, was coming from. So there are precedents in a sense for calling this a national security problem. But Venezuela is not such a big player in this. In fact, I was looking at the statement by the US intelligence community, which is made annually, and one was issued in June, about where the threats come from to American national security. And although there's quite a bit in there about the threat from drugs, both the cocaine type and the fentanyl type of drugs, the synthetic opiates, Venezuela isn't actually mentioned in that intelligence document. So it's a peripheral player. Its main importance was as a through route, a smuggling route, both for the Colombian cartels and others, to be a point of departure across the Caribbean. So that's the kind of importance of it in the drugs trade. You wouldn't say it was a central player in the sense of being the place where most of it was made, as Colombia was in the 90s, that kind of thing.
And look, if the United States, before we move on from this, if the United States continues in the kind of action it's doing, if it escalates military action, but it does not have, if Trump does not have congressional approval for that military action, what does that mean? What can happen? How much trouble is he in? How contentious is that?
Well, look, those of us who can think back to things like the UK joining military action in Iraq in 2003 can well remember these arguments about legality. And if one was to make a general rule, it's that people who are opposed to or feel very nervous about impending military action often make legal arguments. And that's sometimes referred to as lawfare. The fact is that the Trump administration has been conducting these lethal operations against the boats for the past 2 months, and so far has not faced a legal challenge. But I think it is the case that if they were to be challenged in court, these things, the legal aspects of this would obviously become much more important, particularly so if it were to be demonstrable that they had killed innocent people in one of these strikes on a boat, or indeed if they're about to start much larger scale operations against Venezuela, for example, to close off their ports or airports or whatever, or to damage the government there. Once again, if innocent people were killed rather than the armed forces of Venezuela, there could be grounds for a legal challenge. And I think that's why it's become so important at this particular moment. So I would say if the thing goes up several notches and we see large-scale raids by those aircraft that America has concentrated in the region, it may well be that we'll also see a legal challenge.
Okay, let's turn now, Mark, to Gaza, because the UN Security Council is scheduled to vote on a US motion to endorse Donald Trump's plans for peace in Gaza. That vote is today. How are we expecting that to go? Which countries are likely to could veto it?
Well, the interesting thing about this, and you're right that it's supposed to be coming up for a vote later today in New York in the Security Council. I think the interesting thing about this standoff or diplomatic disagreement is there's a big gap between the kind of resolution that America has put forward, and we've seen drafts of that over the last couple of weeks, which is essentially about trying to solidify the ceasefire and turn it into something much more lasting. And therefore, it goes into the arrangements for setting up a new if you like, non-political, internationally supervised authority to run the Gaza Strip, and an international stabilization force, could be up to 40,000 troops that would be contributed by countries like Indonesia, Azerbaijan, Pakistan, Egypt, that would go in and secure the Gaza Strip. So it's quite an ambitious plan. Now, the Russians have put forward a counter proposal, which really strips out almost everything I've just said to you and really just reaffirms the status of Gaza as a Palestinian territory that has to be part of a two-state solution. Now, broadly, that shows their agenda, which is to try and add some language about a two-state solution to the American proposal, in which that sort of language is notable by its absence. It just hints at a future self-determination for the Palestinian people. Now, the two resolutions are so different that unless Russia and China, which also has veto power and backs the Russian resolution, give quite a lot of ground, it looks like it might well be a stalemate on that, because they really are very different, the two proposals. So it may be that Russia and China are really simply trying to get a more explicit reference to a future Palestinian state into that resolution, or it may be that they seriously want to derail the Trump plan.
Yeah, I mean, and look, meanwhile, things are still evolving on the ground. The Times' Israel correspondent Gabriel Weiniger has been talking about the Hamas fighters stuck underground in those tunnels, still inside Gaza. And, if the Trump plan were to go ahead, that calls for an international peacekeeping force. But they're going to be a peacekeeping force on the ground with heavily armed people still in tunnels. I mean, this all just sounds sort of deeply, deeply implausible, even if plans go ahead, doesn't it, Mark?
Well, look, one can think of all kinds of international forces that have gone into places from the Balkan Wars of the 90s onwards, say. And it always looks problematic when these things are being brought to the Security Council. And some of them indeed turn out to be either impossible or mandates that are too difficult to really work on the ground. And some of them do help to save life, aid people getting humanitarian supplies in and reconstruction, all that kind of thing. Obviously, we don't know how it's going to turn out. Now, one of the things that's been around over the last week or two, as you say, is when the Israelis pulled back. So they basically got out of the most inhabited parts of Gaza along the coastline there and withdrew to the so-called Yellow Line, which still leaves them occupying about 50% of the Gaza Strip. It emerged that a large group of Hamas and other fighters were still in the Israeli side near the city of Rafah, which is in the south, close to Egypt. Now, at times we've heard numbers of 200, at times we've heard 100. It's a considerable number. The Israelis have basically said, look, we're just going to surround where we think the tunnel entrances may or may not be, and, wait for them to come out, starve them out, to put it crudely. Others have intervened to argue diplomatically, to argue that the Americans should be aiding the removal of those people by, non-violent means, that they should give up their weapons and basically either be deported from the Gaza Strip or in some other way got out of there. Look, it's symptomatic of a desire on the part of Hamas in the first place to retain forces in being inside that area of Gaza that's still occupied by Israel. And that in itself could be quite a significant problem when the new international forces are deployed, if indeed that happens. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's complicated. And you've got these different people jockeying for advantage. And in Hamas's case, just simply trying to survive.
Yeah. Look, finally, Mark, let's turn to Ukraine, where the city of Pokrovsk has apparently largely fallen to Russian forces after an 18-month battle. How significant a setback is this for Ukraine?
Well, has it fallen or hasn't it? I mean, we've seen this in some of these industrial towns in the Donbas over the last 3.5 years. Bakhmut, you may remember, was the scene of a terrible struggle lasting the best part of 18 months. In the end, the Russians got Bakhmut. It looks like it's going to be a similar story with Pokrovsk, which is an important railway town, industrial town. It's something the Ukrainians wanted to hold on to. But yes, it's true that in the last few weeks, Russian forces have successfully infiltrated in small numbers. And that's possible, obviously, because of the built environment, the urban nature of this place, that even with all those drones and other things looking to stop them, the Russians have been able to sneak in and have, I think, largely got the city. Probably when the Ukrainian army finally concedes that it's gone, it will be more of a whimper than a bang. But yes, it's important. It's important to the Ukrainian energy sector for various reasons to do with the coal trains that used to use the railways in that part of Pokrovsk, or that part of the Donbas, I should say, that could now be blocked. And it's important because it gives the Russians high ground and forces the Ukrainians to fall back to a new defensible line quite a bit further back, sort of 20 kilometers further back. So it's all part of that long-term slow eating away of Ukrainian control in the Donbas. But it would be an unwelcome development if the Ukrainians had to admit the struggle was finally over there.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark Urban. Always good to speak to you, Mark. And look, if you want even more Mark, Mark has been making some special films for the Times Originals YouTube channel. Search Times Originals and you'll find it there, along with a lot more documentaries, opinion pieces and explainers as well. Thank you very much indeed, Mark Urban.